Let us welcome to the top of the tower, Hugh Fearnley Whittingstall. Welcome, Hugh. Nice to see you.
Lovely to be here, Ryan.
The man behind, the River Cottage and so many. How many decades was Channel 4 in your association?
Quite a few decades. Well, certainly going back to the beginning of this century, we shot the first River Cottage show in 1999.
Really?
So yeah, 25 years.
What I loved about it, as somebody who's not a foodie per se, even though that word is in itself a bit odd, I just loved how accessible it was. It was more than about food. I thought it was about community. It was about social life.
Yeah, very much so.
Would that be fair to say?
Totally fair. But of course, food is one of the lovely things in a community. It's one of the things that brings people together. And in Dorset, where River Cottage is, and just over the border in Devon, where I now live, not too far away, food still is. It's a thing that brings people together, and I love being part of that. It's great having our little cafe down there at the cookery school and seeing people come in. It's a great scene.
I think you might have been in some ways ahead of the curve in the sense that all those years ago when you were living off the land, or encouraging people like me to try to grow something or go out and get your mackerel or whatever it might be. We're now looking at that more closely in this age with a view to not just our own diet but to keep an eye on the planet.
100%. And I think people have a genuine appetite for food with a good story. And the story is, well, where did the food come from? And if it's like, well, you grew it yourself, that's a great story. Or I caught it myself, that's a really good story too. Or I got it from this guy at the farmer's market who, told me about his amazing Tamworth Cross Gloucester Old Spot pigs, and he sent me home with the fattest pork chop I've ever had. That's also a good story. So good stories about food often come from the community, and then sometimes they come from further afield. If you're buying chocolate, maybe it's interesting to know about which part of the world the cocoa beans were grown in, or you want to make sure that the people who grew it are being well looked after. So there are many ways of telling good stories about food, but they're almost as important as the quality of the food itself.
Yeah, do you think that sometimes, like you talk about farmers market, or quality food can be prohibitive to some aspects of society because of the cost involved, or do you think it's getting better in that regard?
Well, often good food does cost a bit more, and certainly if when you're looking at sourcing really good meat, and you want a good story and the first bit of the good story being, well, the animals lived well, they were well looked after, that does put the price up. That's one of the reasons we have to be ready to use every part of an animal, and I'm quite old school like that.
I've seen your work. Yeah.
Well, you know what I mean. You know what I mean when I say
nothing left to the imagination. Yeah.
But if I say crew beans to you, Ryan, you know what I'm talking about, don't you?
So you're
pig's trotters.
I know. But you don't mind that, do you? You feel that there should be no waste. Everything goes in.
Absolutely, and that's how things always used to be. I also think that we are in a difficult situation with food in society, which is that actually you can eat really well and healthily on a low budget if you cook. If you know your way a little way around the kitchen, and you know how to find good, inexpensive ingredients, you can make a really delicious meal from the cheaper cuts of meat or for some really lovely fresh vegetables. If you're cooking, if you don't want to cook and you're dependent on ready meals, and if you need to get, or takeaways, then it's harder to get really good, healthy food on a budget.
Yeah, it is. And do you know, there's something about the healthy food order in. I'm thinking of a few names. I don't want to say them because I don't want to be pejorative, but it's so easy. It's so delicious, but it's so easy and it's so wrong. Like, I would kind of feel rotten afterwards. It's also really expensive.
Yeah.
When you compare, if you cook at home, if you have the time, the inclination, and the will and the way, it's much cheaper to make your dinner at home than it is to order anything in.
Yeah, well, I write cookbooks, so I write for people who like cooking, but I try and make it easy for them. I try and make it fun and exciting, and more in the last few years, I've tried to make sure it's really good for us too.
What about meat? Where are we on meat? Is it time for everyone to reconsider their intake of meat, or?
I would say reconsider is a really good word, Ryan. Not necessarily abandon. I'm still an omnivore, and I eat meat and fish, but I do eat considerably less than I used to, and plants come first, and this has been the case for a while. This is the same at River Cottage, at our cookery school in Devon. We are still omnivores. We take great pride in, we have livestock on the farm, and we get fish from local fishermen who go out from the local ports, but we put plants first. And I'm actually teaching at River Cottage tomorrow. We do a 4-day course. Tomorrow's the veg day, and I'm teaching the veg day, which I usually do, which I really enjoy. And I say to people, you're going to eat some lovely meat and fish while you're here, but today everything's going to be plants. And sometimes it's great to put the meat and fish aside and concentrate on making the plants delicious, because meat and fish are quite tyrannical ingredients. They grab a lot of attention. We tend to, we like marinating them or barbecuing them or crisping them up. And then the veg becomes an afterthought. Put the meat and fish on one side and do all those amazing things with the plants, and they become incredibly delicious.
Yeah, I love your enthusiasm, but I'm a desperate man. I am a carnivore who looks at the plate, and if I didn't see any meat, I'd say this is Hamlet without the prince.
I think that there's a way past that, Ryan.
Come on, help me. I want to learn. I'm a willing student.
This is why I brought this book in for you
How
today,
to eat
Ryan.
30 plants a week. Okay, educate me and help me. First of all, I have this now as a gastronomic manual of sorts to help me.
Yeah. So what the first thing to remember about the plant kingdom is it is actually where most of the exciting flavors we can think about come from. Meat, of course, is exciting, and if you've charred that steak or you've got the crackling going on the pork, that's really delicious. But in terms of really fun, funky flavors, different textures, aromatics, my 30 plants, all the spices count. When you're trying to count get to your 30, all the spices count, nuts and seeds count. It isn't just about what we think of as fruit and veg, fresh fruit and veg. There are so many great plant ingredients, sweet ones, sour ones, tart ones, spicy ones, and lots of aromatics. So in the grand scheme of things, the difference between a pork chop and a steak, there's a difference. But the difference between a walnut and a leek or a pear and a coriander seed, I mean, these are fantastic flavors and textures, and juicy, lovely fresh fruits and crispy, snappy leaves. And then, of course, we've got all those tools like the barbecue that I mentioned, or the oven. And if you roast plants, roast your roots with a bit of spice, they become caramelized and crispy and chewy. We just have to lavish a little bit of attention and be ready to embrace that incredible variety of tastes and textures. And we can get to 30 plants a week pretty easily and have a delicious time while we're doing it.
I was shocked at the list that's there, because it's such a comprehensive list. And knowing I was going to be talking to you about this today, I kind of became conscious of it in the last 48 hours plus. And I realised, I had a stir fry last night, and I was putting extra vegetables in it to go, I'm up to nearly 17 now.
Yeah.
That was after 2 days. So I think I was trying to impress the visiting inspector. But with that in mind, it's easier than one might think.
It's easier than one might think, but it needs a slight shift of mind. Basically, the first thing I invite everyone to do is not to go out and buy a load of unfamiliar plant ingredients, not at all. Just remind yourself of the plants that you already like, because chances are there's a bunch of them that you probably haven't actually had in your kitchen for a while. So the idea that you've got the end papers of the book open, the list there, and also the second half of it in the back of the book, there's over 200 plants there. There's not going to be many on that list that you haven't tried at some time. It's not a list of obscure new ingredients. No. It's a list to remind you just how diverse and exciting the world of plants already is. The plants and that you've probably eaten and tried before.
Yeah, I think that's what scared me about you coming in was I thought I was going to have to go and get my wellies out and head foraging in a forest somewhere for the obscure plants. I was wrong. You're right. There's a great selection here. It's the old favorites are all in there. Don't be lonely. Don't worry. And
nothing wrong with a few frozen peas.
No.
or a tin of beans. I mean, these are good ingredients. When we talk, there's a lot of talk recently about ultra processed foods being not very healthy for us, and it is very concerning. But that doesn't mean like you can't have good tinned beans or stuff from the freezer. There's convenience is up to a certain point makes life a lot easier and allows us to eat more things that are good for us. It's when we're completely dependent on food that's been processed from start to finish that we must start to get concerned about whether we're getting proper nutrition.
Will you stick around for a few more minutes? I've got more to ask you.
I'd love
about
to.
Other things. Hugh Fearnley Whittingstall live at the top of the tower this morning. This afternoon even. Take a quick track from train. This afternoon I have the great Hugh Fearnley Whittingstall. We're talking about how to eat 30 plants a week. It's 100 recipes to boost your health and energy. And I wonder why you decided now is the time. Now is the right time for such a thing.
Well, I must say that, at the beginning of last year, I just got underway on on this book, but it wasn't quite this book. I hadn't really decided to drill fully into the 30 plant thing, but it's not my idea, by the way. It's very important to say that. And the brilliant introduction to the book is written by Tim Spector, who you'll know, who's this guru of gut health. But because this number kept coming up, I was hearing it on the radio, I was reading it in the papers, there was this consensus that if we can eat 30 plants a week, that's really healthy. So I rang Tim up. I said, look, Tim, this is a real thing, right? It's not going away. He said, no, this is very genuinely useful. So I thought, right, well, maybe I'll just put a slight twist on the plan for the book, and then it becomes ultimately quite consuming because you want to make that 30 plants easy for everyone. But the science behind it's really interesting. The original study wasn't about 30 plants or how many plants. It was just, can we find out whether there are better health outcomes and a more diverse gut microbiome, which we know is a key to a lot of good health outcomes, given diets like if we identify as an omnivore, a vegan or a veggie or a paleo person or a low carb. And they examined 11,000 people's diets. They all kept really accurate food diaries, and yet none of those patterns emerged for those particular diets as being one any better than the other. I.e., there wasn't anything that said that for sure a vegan would be more healthy than someone who eats meat and fish. But across all the different diets, what they did find when they drilled into people's food diaries was quite simply, didn't matter whether you were omnivore, vegan or veggie, the more plants you were eating, the more diverse your gut biome was, and the better your long-term health outcomes for things like heart disease, type 2 diabetes and these critical things. So it wasn't the original idea of the study.
Yes.
And then the number 30 came up because some people were already achieving that because they were keen on their veg and plants, and others weren't so far off and others were. But once you get past 30, the benefits still go up, but they plateau a little bit. So Tim and his colleagues said, well, it looks to us like 30 is achievable.
Yeah.
Sounds a lot, but it is achievable.
It's not as bad as you might think.
So let's go after it. Let's encourage people to have it in their sights. And my role is and let's make it delicious and fun to get there.
Yeah, exactly. For kids like me to try and get our heads around it.
Kids like you, Ryan.
Trying to figure it all out.
You and other kids around the block.
I've got the nursery palate, you see. That's my problem.
Oh, I'm with you on that. I'm a sweet tooth.
Well, your book, which I have at home, which is so ruined by flour, and which is a great compliment to any chef's book, as you know.
Indeed.
Is the banana bread recipe from your, gosh, it's going back 20 years.
Might be veg every, it might be the River Cottage family cookbook. Yeah.
It's about 20 years ago.
Absolutely.
Well, I mean, I've been making that. I think I might have been brought up in it myself as an adult. It's
great.
Just such a good recipe, and it's
lovely.
It's stunning. And the roast chicken.
That's really nice to hear.
No.
I mean, there are plenty of treaty recipes in 30 plants a week, but these days I dial down the sugar a little bit. Even though I've got a really sweet tooth myself, I find actually we're very happy with much less sugar than we think. It's just tradition that's handed down that, that a Victoria sponge has got equal amounts of flour, butter, sugar and eggs. If you do equal amounts of flour, butter and eggs, but you halve the sugar, it's still a completely delicious cake, and I promise you, nobody complains that it's got that it's not sweet enough.
Good sell, Victoria sponge, you're messing with the best there.
And then you maybe slip in a few poppy seeds and put a bit of lemon zest in there, and you're adding some genuinely wholesome ingredients.
I don't know about the poppy seeds. You lost me on the poppy seeds.
What went wrong with the poppy seeds? It was going so well, Ryan.
It's just because I was in my head. I just had this because I've seen that you have a Victoria sponge in that old cookbook too.
Yeah,
and it's just so delicious and glorious. It's like something out of Alice in Wonderland. Anyway, poppy seeds are fine. We're all friends.
Poppy seeds optional, but I think you'll come around to it, Ryan. Give it a try.
But I like what we were talking during this song about how we're of a certain vintage. You're a little older than me.
I am a little.
By a tiny bit.
We've established that. Yeah.
By a hair's breadth. But suffice to say that within that, I was saying, I've got to change my diet to. You said you won't be able to change the march of time, but you can.
You can oil the wheels.
You can oil the wheels, lovely. Yeah. And I would say, well, I do a little bit of running now, which I never did before, a little 5K.
Well, you look very well on it.
Well, you're very kind to say I was complimenting you in a reciprocal way. But I was delighted to hear you say, yeah, I do 5, maybe 7. I'm going, oh, great. This is like I'm in the creche for runners. And you're absolutely the same, because I've got Chris Evans talking to me about running marathons and stuff like that. I can't bear the pressure. It's like
I think that's
torture.
a long way to go. I mean, I'm sort of getting towards 10K seems very exciting to me. me.
doable.
But, I've got knees and ankles and feet and stuff, and they don't want to do a whole marathon. They've told me that. They've made it very clear.
We had a long conversation. Before we go, you studied psychology and philosophy.
I did, yeah.
When you were in university. And I often think the way you've dealt with food and the culinary world has a psychological feel to it, in the sense of getting your head around how and habits, but also philosophically about why you would do such things. You've put your good degree to good use in some ways.
Well, that's
in an unlikely way.
Yeah, that's very interesting you bring that up, because it doesn't come up very often, but maybe there is something in that. Yeah. And I said early, food with a good story. There's more to food than the literal story of food, of what's on your plate, and it's a cultural story as well, and it's an approach to life. And I think every time we sit down to eat, ideally in company with family, friends, loved ones, that's an opportunity for something very special to happen. If you grab that opportunity, more than once a day, then you're doing a great thing for your life and for those around you.
Yeah, well, the ancient Greeks were doing it. Break bread and welcome
that's
to my home.
That's what companion means.
That's what it is. Oh, that's what it is. Companion with
bread.
Of course. Jeez,
exactly.
Okay. What a nice way to end our conversation today.
I've enjoyed it very much.
And not a
Ryan.
slice of bread between us. And if it was, it would be whole grain with lots of poppy seeds.
Indeed.
Hugh Fearnley Whittingstall joining us live in studio today. Congratulations on the book. It was a real eye-opener, for, as I say, for the likes of me. So good luck with it.
Thank you.
How to Eat 30 Plants a Week. 100 beautiful recipes to boost your health and energy.